Today we're using a money box to create the Aliens Power Loader scene. Welcome to the Geeky Workbench. Aliens is one of my all-time favorite films. I was too young to watch it when it came out, and when I watched it in the early 90s I was still too young, but a friend of a friend had access to a ton of VHS tapes of his parents, so we snuck in and watched all the films we weren't supposed to watch. For this diorama I bought these 30mm Gale Force 9 miniatures which have great detail on them. To create the scene where Ripley is holding the alien queen right above the loading lock, I needed to repose the miniature a bit. This meant increasing the angle of the power loader arms and rotating both grippers 90 degrees. I glued the parts together with my sprue glue mixture to add a bit more stability to the now weakened joints, and I added metal pins where possible for the same reason. The pre-assembled and customized parts are now ready for priming, and I can get started on the alien queen. This should be fairly straightforward as I'm not changing her pose. Well, not now anyway. I put the base aside to use later, and then shaved off the mold lines before starting to assemble the miniature. This miniature is very detailed, but it probably doesn't show so well on camera. Even though I love the films, I'd never put up a big alien model anywhere. I'd have nightmares, but this little queen is okay, she is kinda cute. And now that the power loader and Ripley are primed, I can start painting the base coats. Thankfully, the power loader is mostly just yellow, which makes it a good warm-up for painting the other more detailed parts later. You can see my glasses in the background. That means I'm wearing my magnifying glasses, and I really need them, because otherwise I couldn't see what's what. And I'm quite happy with the results on Ripley. I took my time and practiced glazing and highlighting. In the past, painting straight lines hasn't been very successful, but trying to mask off tiny lines on this arm seemed even less promising, so I just went for freehanding this. To my surprise, it turned out better than expected. Then it was time to assemble the power loader and Ripley, which I was looking forward to the most. But because I had changed the pose, the joysticks Ripley is holding in her hands didn't quite fit the loader arms anymore. Luckily, this was an easy fix by simply cutting the attachment piece off and repositioning it. Once the assembly was done, I added some chipping by painting some scratches and edges with metallic paint. Off camera, I added some edge highlighting to the alien and airbrushed both miniatures with gloss varnish. And while that was drying, I started working on the loading lock. Before cutting any styrene, I created a rough mock-up of the loading lock to get an idea of the size. And because the inner doors are already open in this scene, I needed to cut an opening into the box. And that's why I first noticed that the non-removable glass was a bit of a nuisance. Then I did another test fit and noticed that the opening was too small for the alien and Ripley to fall into, so I cut it wider off camera. With the new dimensions, I could finally cut the styrene pieces for the walls of the loading lock. The angle I chose meant I needed to make the wall with the lights in them too, but I wasn't sure how I was going to make them yet. I always try to build everything true to scale and exact to the original, but the box having a set size meant I had to adjust some parts to make them in scale for the miniatures. While I took some time to think about the lights, I applied a black and brown oil wash onto the power loader. This miniature truly is a lot of fun. But I admit, the beginning of the lock did give me a bit of a headache. I wanted it to fit inside the box, but still look like it would be big enough for Ripley and the alien to fall in. Also, I needed to think of possible wiring and lights that needed space too. And I wanted it to look as close to the original as possible. So yeah, choosing this bunny box turned out to make this a real challenge. Next, I wanted to create the floor above, and I thought the unused spaces would make an interesting structure. Also, they were closer to the original grates than anything I could make at that moment. So I chopped up the bases to pieces and glued them back together, and I got this piece, which I was happy with. The raw shaft of the loading lock needed some attention, so I started with the easiest part, the door at the bottom. I created a paper template first, which I then used to cut the styrene piece. After I had cut the door piece, I used metal files and sandpaper to bevel and smooth the edges. I glued it to another piece of styrene, and that was the door done. Then I finally decided on how to create these lights. I made and printed these cylindrical pieces, which I attached an SMD LED to light it up. This way the light wouldn't dazzle the viewer like multiple LED filaments would have, unless I added resistors, which would make the space inside the box even more crowded. And I quite like the subtle light effect this option has. I attached the SMD lights to the cylinders with UV resin that I could later paint black. Then it was time to add some panels to the shaft. I used 0.5 mm styrene for those and glued them on with cement glue. Next, I designed and 3D printed these ladder rungs, which were a lot of fun to add to the log, because now it started to come together for me. On the top I added 2 mm thick styrene to compensate for the Frankenstein grate and sanded everything before priming the pieces. Then it was time for decals. I went to Adobe Illustrator to recreate the signs, for which I had reference pictures close by. I even made decals for the vents because I had totally forgotten to make them when I was building the shaft. It was difficult to see in the screenshots, but I believe the walls are metallic and the doors are white. And then I realized that some of the decals weren't the right size and printed them again. I started applying all the decals to the shaft and forgot to count in the floor and upper doors, so later I had to reposition the top decals. Luckily I only had to add a bit of water to the decals and they peeled off without breaking. They probably weren't completely dry yet anyway. After the decals, I designed the small warning lamps that are at the bottom of the loading lock. I'm still very much a beginner at 3D sculpting because I never take the time to actually follow any tutorials, but these lamps are basically just a cone on a cylinder, so that wasn't too hard. Then I 3D printed a bunch in 2 different sizes. I painted the tops with clear red and the bottom parts with a metallic paint. Then I painted the ladder and glued in the small lamps. I really like the effect these small details have on a project. Before painting the red stripes, I applied some clear varnish to minimize the red paint bleeding through. After all lamps were in place, I installed the LEDs I had prepared before. Off camera, I airbrushed 2 coats of gloss varnish before I added a bit of black oil wash to the loading lock. I closed the box and the loading lock was done. Then I had the idea to add more details to the power loader, namely the tubes and wires, or at least some of them. This was a pain in the neck because I had run out of CA glue and was left with a tiny bit of gel superglue that wouldn't stick, but I got there in the end. Speaking of the end, we're nearly done now. Thank you for watching, and a special thanks to everyone who likes, shares, hypes or comments. You're helping out this channel a lot. The next project is closely related to this one, so keep an eye out for that one, and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, see you in the next one. Bye!